Hey guys, tonight we slip into the grim, ash-dusted world of a medieval plague survivor, where every creak of your wooden door might signal death's shadow lurking outside. Picture yourself in a muddy village, the air thick with the stench of decay as you step over abandoned carts and rotting turnips. The Black Death has swept through, leaving bodies piled like forgotten firewood. You're one of the lucky ones, or so they say, but surviving this nightmare comes with a cost you probably won't survive in spirit. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the doorway of your thatched hovel, the year roughly 1350, and the world feels like it's unraveling. The Black Death, that merciless wave of bubonic plague, has carved a jagged scar across Europe, wiping out maybe a third to half the population. Historians still argue over the exact toll, with estimates ranging from 20 to 60 million dead. Your village, once buzzing with gossip and ox carts, is now a ghost town. The baker, who overcharged for rye loaves, gone. The priest, who droned through Latin sermons, dead. Your neighbour's yappy dog, silent. You're left in a world where the wind howls louder than human voices, and every cough, yours or a stranger's, sends your heart racing. Did you dodge the plague by luck, or is it just biding its time? The air feels heavier now, not just from the damp straw underfoot, but from the weight of what's missing. You trudge past fields choked with weeds, where crops rot because no one's left to harvest them. The feudal system, that rigid ladder of lords and serfs, wobbles as the labour pool shrinks. You hear whispers of survivors in nearby towns demanding higher wages. Imagine that, a peasant with bargaining power. But don't get too hopeful, this new freedom comes with a catch. The nobles are furious, and royal decrees are already trying to freeze wages and chain you back to the plough. Historians still argue whether this upheaval sparked a proto-capitalist shift or just tightened the elite's grip. Your boots squish in the mud as you pass the village well, now a breeding ground for flies. A quirky tidbit from the time, some survivors swore by drinking their own urine to ward off the plague's return. Desperate times, right? You're not that far gone yet, but you've seen enough to know desperation is a powerful motivator. You pause by a crooked signpost, its paint peeling like skin. The road ahead leads to a town that might have food, or it might have bandits. Either way, you're not staying here, where the silence screams louder than any church bell. You adjust your ragged cloak, patched from a dead man's tunic, and take a step. The plague's shadow still clings to you, a reminder that surviving is just the start of your troubles. Every creak of a distant shutter makes you flinch, expecting another wave of sickness. You've heard tales of pestilence airs poisoning entire towns, a mainstream belief back then, blaming foul miasmas for the plague's spread. Modern science points to fleas and rats, but you don't know that. You're stuck, sniffing the air, wondering if it's safe to breathe. A grim joke floats through your mind. At least the rats are eating better than you are. You pass a crumbling stone wall where someone scratched a cross and a prayer. Faith feels flimsier now, but you cling to it because what else do you have? The sky above is grey, heavy with rain that'll turn your path to sludge. You keep moving because standing still feels like inviting the reaper to finish the job. Your stomach growls, a constant nag since the last loaf of barley bread ran out. You spot a crow pecking at something unnameable in the dirt. Food is scarce, and you're not above fighting that bird for a scrap. Another dark chuckle escapes you, surviving the plague just to brawl with a crow. That's your life now. You've heard of nobles hoarding grain while peasants like you starve, and the resentment burns. Some say the plague was God's wrath, but you're starting to wonder if it's the lords who are the real punishment. Historians still argue whether the Black Death broke the feudal system or just cracked it, but you feel the fractures in every empty field you pass. As you walk, You notice a tattered cloth flapping on a fence, dyed red, to mark a plague. House cast. You trudge through the skeletal remains of a village, your boots sinking into the churned mud where cartwheels once rolled. The Black Death has left this place a hollow shell, and you're wandering through what feels like the bones of the world you knew. Houses stand empty, their doors ajar, swaying in the damp breeze. You pass a thatched roof, caved in, straw spilling like guts from a wound. The fields beyond are choked with nettles, their wheat stalks unharvested, bowing under the weight of neglect. It's 1350, give or take, and Europe's population has been gutted. Some say 50 million souls gone, though historians still argue if it was a third or closer to half. You don't care about numbers, you feel the absence in every silent corner. The village well, once a hub of chatter, is now a graveyard for leaves and worse. You peer into its depths, half expecting to see a face staring back, but it's just your own shadow rippling in the murky water. You've heard tales of wells poisoned by desperate survivors, a quirky rumor that some swore was true, claiming Jews or lepers tainted the water to spread the plague. It's nonsense, but fear makes people cling to wild stories. You step back, your throat dry, and decide to keep moving. The air smells of rot and wet earth, and every gust feels like it's carrying the plague's ghost. You pass a crooked wooden cross, hammered into the dirt by someone who thought prayers could stop the pestilence. They didn't. The church bell hasn't rung in weeks, and you wonder if the bell ringer's bones are among those piled outside the village. A mainstream fact hits you. The Black Death, spread by fleas on rats, didn't care for prayers or status. It took priests and peasants alike. You smirk grimly, thinking how the rats are probably feasting better than you are. Food is a memory now. The last barley loaf you had was days ago, and your stomach's growling is louder than any sermon. The path winds past abandoned hovels, their windows dark like empty eyes. You spot a child's wooden toy, half buried in the mud, and your chest tightens. You had neighbours once, Giles, who brewed sour ale, Agnes, who sang off-key while milking her cow. They're gone now, their homes as lifeless as their bodies. You try not to think about it, but the silence screams their names. Historians still argue whether the plague's devastation birthed a new social order or just deepened the old miseries, but you see it firsthand. The feudal ties that bound lord to serf are fraying. You've heard whispers of peasants refusing to work unless paid more. Imagine that, a serf with a spine. But the lords aren't amused, and you've seen their men-at-arms cracking skulls to keep order. Your cloak, patched from a dead man's tunic, snags on a thorn bush. You tug it free, cursing under your breath. A dark joke crosses your mind. At least the thorns can't catch the plague. You're alone now, but not quite. Crows circle overhead, their caws like mocking laughter. You spot one pecking at something unidentifiable in the dirt, and your empty stomach lurches. You're not desperate enough to fight a bird for scraps, but give it a day. The fields you pass should be alive with workers, but they're empty. The plough rusted where it was abandoned. You've heard of villages where survivors burned their dead to stop the plague's spread, only to find the smoke drew bandits like moths. The road stretches toward a distant town where you hope to find bread, or at least news. But hope feels like a bad bet. You pass a cart, its wheel broken, its load of wool rotting in the rain. Trade is dying, and with it, the world you knew. You remember the merchant who used to boast about his silks from far-off lands. Now he's probably a corpse, his silks shrouding rats. Another grim chuckle escapes you. Surviving the plague just to starve in a ghost town? That's your luck. You adjust your cloak and keep walking, the mud sucking at your boots. The sky is leaden, promising rain that'll turn this path into a river of sludge. You don't stop. Stopping feels like surrendering, and you've already outlasted too much for that. You stumble along the muddy track, the weight of survival pressing harder than the hunger in your gut. The Black Death has left you alive, but it's carved a hollow space inside you, one that aches worse than any plague saw. You're a survivor, sure, but the question gnaws at you. Why you? Why not your sister, who hummed while weaving, or your friend who could charm a laugh out of anyone? Their faces flicker in your mind as you pass a crumbling stone wall, its mossy surface scratched with a crude prayer. The world feels like it's judging you for still breathing, and the guilt is a shadow you can't outrun. You pause by a gnarled oak, its branches clawing at the grey sky. The silence is suffocating. No children's laughter, no clanging of a blacksmith's hammer. Just the wind whispering through empty fields. A mainstream fact anchors you. The Black Death, peaking around 1347 to 1351, killed so indiscriminately that entire families vanished overnight, leaving survivors to wrestle with questions no priest could answer. You remember the village square, once alive with market stalls, now a graveyard for memories. You saw bodies carted off, their limbs dangling like broken puppets. You didn't cry then, you were too numb, but now, alone, the tears threaten. Your boots squelch as you move on, passing a cottage with a red X daubed on its door, a plague marker. You shiver, not from the cold, but from the memory of screams echoing from that house weeks ago. Why you? You were no saint, no better than the miller who shared his ale or the widow who prayed daily. A quirky tidbit floats up. Some survivors believed wearing a dead person's clothes could transfer their luck, as if survival was a charm you could steal. You glance at your patched cloak, taken from a corpse, and wonder if it's cursed instead. A dry laugh escapes. Lucky you, dressed in a dead man's rags and still dodging death. The path curves toward a stream, its water sluggish and brown. You kneel to splash your face, hoping to wash away the heaviness, but the cold only sharpens your thoughts. You see your reflection, gaunt and unfamiliar, like you're haunting yourself. Historians still argue whether survivors' guilt reshaped medieval society, fueling religious fervor or breaking faith entirely. You feel both. Part of you wants to pray for answers, part of you wants to curse the heavens. The church taught the plague was God's wrath, but if that's true, why spare you, a nobody with calloused hands and a quick temper? You stand, wiping your hands on your tunic, and spot a raven perched on a fence post, watching you like it knows your secrets. You mutter, "What are you staring at?" half expecting it to answer. It doesn't, but its beady eyes follow you as you walk on. The guilt clings like damp wool, making every step heavier. You think of your sister's smile, your friend's laugh, and the weight doubles. You've heard of survivors turning to flagellation, whipping themselves to atone for living. You're not there yet, but you get it, the need to punish yourself for being the one left behind. The road stretches toward a distant hill where a church spire pokes through the mist. You're not sure if you'll find comfort there or just more empty pews. A grim joke crosses your mind. Maybe the plague spared you so you could starve instead. You pass a field where a single cow stands, ribs sharp against its hide, lowing mournfully. You're not much better off, your stomach a knot of hunger and grief. You've heard rumors of towns where survivors band together, sharing what little they have, but you've also heard of those who hoard and fight, trusting no one. You want to believe in the first kind, but the world feels too broken for kindness. As you near the church, you see a fresh grave, unmarked, the dirt still loose. You wonder who dug it and if they're still alive to mourn. The guilt surges again. Why you, not them? You clench your fists, nails biting into your palms, and keep walking. The sky darkens, promising rain, and you pull your cloak tighter. Surviving the plague was just the beginning. Now you're fighting a quieter battle, one no one else can see. You shuffle along a rutted path, your stomach snarling louder than a cornered dog. The Black Death has stripped the world bare, and hunger is your new shadow, gnawing at you with every step. The fields you pass are a mockery of plenty. Wheat stalks rot in clumps unharvested because the hands that worked them are gone. You're in the early 1350s, and the feudal economy, that creaking machine of lords and labour, is stuttering to a halt. A mainstream fact hits hard. The plague's death toll, maybe 50% of Europe's population, gutted the workforce, leaving crops to wither and markets to collapse. You're not just surviving the disease now, you're fighting to find a crust of bread in a world that's forgotten how to feed itself. You spot a lone turnip, half buried in the mud, its skin blotched like a plague sore. You kneel, prying it free with numb fingers, and brush off the dirt. It's mealy and bitter, but you bite into it anyway, wincing as the taste coats your tongue. A wry chuckle escapes. Congratulations, you've sunk to eating mud-caked roots. You remember the village baker, his oven always warm with rye loaves. He's dead now, his shop a hollow shell. You've heard of nobles hoarding grain in their stone keeps, while peasants like you scrounge for scraps. The unfairness burns hotter than your hunger. The path winds past a deserted hamlet, its cottages sagging under mossy thatch. You peer into one, hoping for a forgotten sack of barley, but find only cobwebs and a broken stool, a quirky tidbit from the time. Some desperate souls turned to eating grass or tree bark, swearing it kept the plague at bay. You're not that far gone, but the turnip sits heavy in your gut, and you wonder how long until you're chewing leaves. Historians still argue whether the plague's economic fallout birthed a new class of wage earners or just deepened the misery of the poor. You feel the truth in your empty hands. Surviving means scavenging, and scavenging feels like stealing from ghosts. You keep moving, the wind biting through your threadbare cloak. Remember that dead man's tunic you patched together? It's barely holding up. You pass a field where a skeletal horse stands too weak to graze. You consider butchering it, but the thought of blood and bone turns your stomach. Another grim joke, at least the horse isn't fighting you for that turnip. You've heard rumors of markets in larger towns where traders still barter, but the roads are long and bandits are bolder now. You clutch a stick you've taken to carrying, less a weapon than a comfort, like a child's blanket. The sky spits rain, turning the path to sludge. You slip, catching yourself on a fence post, and curse under your breath. The hunger makes you dizzy, your thoughts sluggish. You remember your mother's barley stew steaming in a clay pot, and the memory stings worse than the cold. The feudal system promised protection for labor, but with half the serfs dead, the lords are scrambling. You've heard of peasants demanding coin for their work. Imagine that, a serf with a purse, but the king's decrees aim to crush that spark, forcing you back to the fields for nothing but threats. You spit into the mud, a small rebellion against a world that's starving you. You spot a crow pecking at something in the dirt, a scrap of mouldy bread. You lunge, startling the bird, and snatch the crust. It's damp, gritty, but you cram it into your mouth, chewing fast before your pride catches up. A third dark laugh bubbles up, surviving the plague to brawl with crows. That's your life now. You keep walking, the rain soaking your cloak, your hunger a dull ache. The path leads toward a town where you hope to find food, or at least someone to share the burden. But the world feels too empty for hope, and every step reminds you, survival is just starvation in slow motion. You trudge through the drizzle, your patched cloak, remember that dead man's tunic, sodden and clinging like a second skin. The hunger from that measly turnip and mouldy crust still claws at your insides, but now you're dodging another kind of menace. The quack healers peddling cures as real as a fairy's promise. The Black Death has left survivors desperate, and where there's desperation, there's always someone ready to profit. It's the early 1350s, and you're navigating a world where hope is a currency and charlatans are rich. A mainstream fact grounds you. Medieval medicine, rooted in humoral theory, blamed the plague on imbalanced bodily fluids, leading to treatments that were often as deadly as the disease itself. You've seen the results, and they aren't pretty. You pass a rickety stall by the roadside where a man with a greasy beard hawks plague-proof tonics. His voice is all honeyed promises, but his eyes dart like a rat's. He waves a vial of cloudy liquid, claiming it's blessed by a hermit who survived the pestilence. You've heard of such remedies, mixtures of vinegar, herbs, and worse. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some healers prescribe crocodile dung mixed with wine, swearing it chased the plague away. You're not desperate enough to drink dung yet, but the thought crosses your mind as you clutch your stick, half tempted to knock his stall over. A dry laugh escapes, surviving the Black Death just to choke on swamp muck wine. That's your kind of luck. The man calls after you, offering a charm made of toad bones for a copper coin you don't have. You keep walking, the mud sucking at your boots. You've seen what these cures do. A neighbor drank a potion of crushed emeralds and bled out by morning. Historians still argue whether these quacks believed their own lies or were just fleecing the scared. You lean toward the latter. Nobody's that stupid, not even in a world turned upside down. The rain stings your face as you pass a ditch where someone's dumped a broken mortar, probably used to grind those useless herbs. You remember your mother's fever, how you paid a healer everything for a poultice that did nothing but stink. The memory burns and you kick the mortar into the mud. The path curves toward a village square where another charlatan preaches to a small crowd. He's got a live chicken under his arm, claiming its blood will ward off the plague's miasma. The crowd murmurs, some nodding, others clutching rosaries. You want to shout that it's nonsense, but fear keeps you quiet. Fear of the crowd, fear of the plague's return. You've seen people cling to anything for hope, amulets, prayers, even rubbing onions on their feet. Another grim chuckle. Imagine surviving the plague only to smell like a stew pot. You sidestep the crowd, keeping your head down. The air smells of wet straw and desperation, and you're not sure which is worse. You pass a churchyard, its graves fresh and uneven, where a woman kneels, muttering prayers over a bundle of herbs. You've tried praying too, but the words feel hollow now. The quacks aren't just selling tonics, they're selling the idea that you can control this chaos. You want to believe, but your empty stomach and aching heart say otherwise. You spot a discarded vial in the grass, its contents spilled like ink. You wonder how many died chasing that false hope. A third dark laugh slips out. Maybe the real plague is believing in miracles. You adjust your cloak, the rain soaking through, and keep moving. The town ahead might have real food or just more liars, but you've got no choice but to find out. Survival means wading through the scams, one muddy step at a time. You slog through the mud, the rain, a steady patter on your cloak, that ragged thing you scavenged from a corpse, remember? The hunger and the quack's false promises still gnaw at you, but now a deeper unease settles in, like a stone in your chest. The Black Death has shaken more than bodies, it's cracked the foundations of faith itself. You're in the early 1350s, and the church, once your anchor, feels as distant as the stars. You pass a chapel, its door hanging off its hinges, the stained glass shattered like someone threw a fit at God. A mainstream fact hits you. The plague killed so many priests, some estimate a third of Europe's clergy, that churches stood empty, leaving survivors like you to question if God had turned his back. The chapel's yard is overgrown, graves spilling into each other like a drunkard's scrawl. You remember the priest who used to bellow sermons about divine wrath, his voice echoing off stone walls. He's gone now, maybe dead, maybe fled. You've heard of priests abandoning their flocks, hiding in monasteries or worse, selling indulgences to line their pockets. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some believers wore plague charms etched with Latin prayers, thinking scribbled words could fend off death. You touch the rough cross hanging at your neck, a gift from your mother, and wonder if it's just dead weight. A dry laugh escapes, surviving the plague just to pray to an empty sky. That's your kind of irony. You step inside the chapel, the air thick with damp and mildew, the altars bare, the candles stolen or melted to stubs. You kneel anyway, out of habit, but the words stick in your throat. Historians still argue whether the plague deepened religious devotion or sparked a crisis of faith. You feel both, torn between clinging to God and cursing him for the silence. You think of the flagellants you saw weeks ago whipping themselves bloody in the town square, screaming that the plague was punishment for sin. You didn't join them, but their desperation lingers in your mind, a mirror to your own doubts. Outside, the rain slows and you hear a distant bell. Another village, maybe, or just a ghost of memory. You stand, your knees creaking, and notice a tattered Bible page stuck to the floor, its ink smudged. You don't pick it up. The church taught the plague was divine justice, but justice for what? You're no saint, but neither was your sister, your friend, your whole village. Another grim chuckle. Maybe God's aim was off. You step back into the drizzle, the chapel's emptiness echoing behind you. The path ahead leads to a town where you hope to find food, maybe answers, but the weight of your questions slows your steps. You pass a lone pilgrim, his robes filthy, muttering prayers as he clutches a rosary. He doesn't look at you and you don't stop. You've heard of new preachers, wild-eyed men claiming visions of the end, drawing crowds with promises of salvation. You're tempted, but you've seen too many lies. Remember those quack tonics? Faith feels like another scam, but you're not ready to let it go. The mud sucks at your boots and you grip your stick, that flimsy comfort. A third dark laugh slips out. Surviving the plague to argue with God? That's your fight now. The town's spires loom in the distance, and you keep walking, chasing a hope you're not sure you believe in anymore. You slog through the muck, your cloak, that scavenged rag from a corpse, remember? Heavy with rain and doubt. The empty chapel you left behind still haunts you, its silence louder than any sermon. Now, as you trudge toward a distant town, you feel the world itself coming unmoored. The Black Death hasn't just killed people, it's torn the social fabric to shreds, leaving lords and peasants snarling at each other like dogs over a bone. It's the early 1350s, and the feudal order, that ironclad system of oaths and obedience, is crumbling faster than the mud under your boots. A mainstream fact grounds you. The plague's massive death toll, perhaps 50 million across Europe, shattered the labor supply, giving survivors like you a flicker of power, but also sparking chaos as nobles fight to keep their grip. You pass a manor house, its walls cracked, its gates unguarded. The lord who lived there used to ride through the village, his horse's hooves splashing serfs like you with mud. Now you've heard he's dead or fled, his fields untended. You spot a group of peasants huddled by a broken fence, their voices low but sharp. They're talking of refusing to work unless paid in coin, not just promises of protection. You've heard of uprisings, peasants burning barns, nobles sending armed men to crush them. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some lords tried bribing survivors with extra ale to keep them ploughing, as if a drunk serf is a loyal one. A dry laugh escapes, surviving the plague just to dodge a lord's whip. That's your new battlefield. The path winds past a field where a single plough lies abandoned, its blade rusted. You remember the old rules. Serfs worked the land, lords took the harvest. But with half the workers dead, the game's changed. You've heard whispers of the Statute of Labourers, a royal decree from 1349 trying to freeze wages and force survivors back to work. Historians still argue whether it sparked rebellion or just resentment, but you feel the anger in your bones. You're no rebel, not yet, but the thought of demanding a coin for your labour feels like spitting in the Lord's face, a small, dangerous thrill. You pause by a stream, its water murky, and splash your face. The cold sharpens your thoughts. You see a nobleman's cart in the distance, its driver shouting at a peasant who's blocking the road. The peasant doesn't budge, his fists clenched. You keep your distance, gripping your stick, that flimsy comfort from earlier. The air smells of wet earth and trouble, and you wonder if the world will ever settle back into its old shape. Another grim chuckle. Maybe the plague didn't just kill people, it killed the rules too. You've heard of towns where peasants now sit at council tables, a notion as wild as drinking that crocodile dung wine you laughed about. The rain picks up again, stinging your cheeks. You pass a burned-out cottage, its charred beams jutting like bones. Was it rebels, bandits, or just despair? You don't know, but the sight tightens your chest. You think of your village, how the Lord's men stopped coming after the plague, took their captain. Now, survivors like you are caught between freedom and fear. Free to demand more, but fearing the noose if you push too far. A third dark laugh slips out. Surviving the plague to pick a fight with a lord? That's your kind of madness. The town ahead glimmers faintly through the mist, promising food or trouble, maybe both. You adjust your cloak and keep moving, the mud pulling at you like the old world trying to drag you back. You plod through the sludge, your boots caked with mud and memories sinking with every step. That tattered cloak, the one you lifted from a corpse, clings to you like the weight of this broken world. The Black Death has unraveled the feudal order, and now you're caught in its aftermath, where survivors like you hold a strange new power. It's the early 1350s, and with half the population gone, maybe 50 million, a mainstream estimate, labor is scarcer than gold. You, a lowly peasant, suddenly have leverage, a chance to demand more than a lord's scraps. But it's a dangerous game, and the path ahead feels like it's teetering between hope and ruin. You pass a field where a handful of workers swing scythes, their faces gaunt but defiant. They're demanding wages, real coin, not just a pat on the head and a mouldy loaf. You've heard of villages where serfs refuse to work unless paid double. Double. A mainstream fact anchors you, the labor shortage after the plague shifted power, leading to uprisings like the Peasants' Revolt in England decades later. For now, you see it in small acts. A farmer bartering his labor for a share of the harvest, a weaver walking away from her loom until the Lord coughs up silver. You pause, leaning on your stick, that flimsy comfort from before, and wonder if you dare ask for more. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some lords, desperate for workers, offered land to survivors, turning serfs into tenants overnight. Imagine that, you owning a scrap of earth instead of breaking your back for someone else's. A dry laugh escapes, surviving the plague just to haggle like a merchant. That's a twist you didn't see coming, but the lords aren't handing out deeds from kindness. They're desperate, their fields choking with weeds. You pass a manor gate, its iron rusted, unguarded. The lord's men are fewer now, and you've heard they're too busy quelling rebellions to chase every runaway serf. The path narrows, winding past a crumbling mill, its wheels still in the sluggish stream. You hear voices, two men arguing over a sack of grain. One's a tenant farmer, the other a lord's steward, red-faced and shouting about duty. The farmer doesn't back down, his voice steady. Historians still argue whether these labor shifts planted seeds for a freer society or just traded one chain for another. You feel the tension in the air, sharp as a blade. You keep walking, not wanting to catch the steward's eye. Your stomach growls, reminding you of that turnip you fought a crow for. Pathetic, but it kept you going. Now the idea of coin for your work feels like a fever dream, bold and risky. The sky clears slightly, the rain easing to a mist. You spot a woman mending a fence, her hands quick, despite her hollow cheeks. She nods at you, a rare flicker of camaraderie. You've heard of villages pooling their labor, sharing harvests to survive. It's tempting, but trust is scarce. Remember those quack tonics peddled by liars? You grip your stick tighter, your only defense in this shifting world. Another grim chuckle, surviving the plague to become a bargaining chip? That's your strange new worth. The town ahead looms closer, its walls promising shelter or strife. You wonder if you'll find work there, maybe even coin, or if the Lord's men will drag you back to the fields. A third dark laugh slips out as you pass a signpost, its carved name weathered to nothing. You're not just a serf anymore, you're a survivor with a voice, however small. But every step feels like a gamble, pushed too hard, and the noose waits. Stay quiet, and you're just a ghost in a dying world. You adjust your cloak, the mist settling on your shoulders, and keep moving toward the town, chasing a chance to be more than a shadow. You trudge through the thinning mist, your cloak still that scavenged rag, damp and heavy as the world around you. The faint promise of power from labor shortages flickers in your mind, but it's overshadowed by a new threat. The roads are no longer safe. The Black Death has gutted order, and bandits now prowl where merchants once travelled. It's the early 1350s, and with villages emptied and lords weakened, lawlessness thrives like weeds in an untended field. A mainstream fact grounds you: the plague's chaos, killing up to half of Europe's population, left roads unguarded, letting thieves and deserters rule the paths you walk. You grip your stick, that flimsy comfort, tighter now, your eyes scanning every shadow. You pass a copse of twisted trees, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. A snapped cartwheel lies in the ditch, its spokes splintered, wool from its load scattered like dirty snow. You imagine the merchant who owned it, ambushed, his throat cut for a sack of grain. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some bandits styled themselves as plague knights, claiming they were chosen by God to punish survivors. What a load. Thieves with a holy excuse. A dry laugh escapes, surviving the plague just to dodge a dagger in the dark. That's your new gauntlet. The path curves around a hill and you hear a rustle in the underbrush. Your heart leaps, but it's just a fox darting away with a rabbit in its jaws. Still you keep your stick raised, your steps cautious. You've heard stories of travelers found stripped naked, their bodies left for crows. The roads used to hum with pilgrims and peddlers. Now, every stranger's a threat. Historians still argue whether the plague's anarchy birthed new criminal networks or just let old ones run wild. You don't care about theories. You just want to reach the town without a knife in your back. You spot a crude marker, a skull impaled on a stake, a bandit's warning, or a survivor's grim joke. Your stomach twists, not just from hunger. Remember that turnip and crow-stolen crust? But from fear. You've heard of gangs made of runaway serfs, soldiers, even priests, all turned feral by loss. Another grim chuckle. Imagine surviving God's wrath just to meet a blade from a fallen monk. You step carefully, avoiding the ruts where someone could hide. The air smells of wet leaves and danger, and you wonder if the town ahead is worth the risk. A distant shout makes you freeze. You duck behind a gnarled oak, peering toward the sound. Two men, ragged and armed with clubs, drag a sack across the path. You hold your breath, praying they don't see you. They're arguing over their haul, oblivious to your presence. You wait until they're gone, your heart pounding like a blacksmith's hammer. The road feels alive now, every snap of a twig a threat. You think of the labor shortages, how they gave you a spark of power, useless if you're dead in a ditch. A third, dark laugh slips out. Surviving the plague to play hide-and-seek with bandits? That's your twisted fate. The town's walls are closer now, grey and weathered through the mist. You hope for safety there, maybe a crust of bread, but you've learned hope is a trickster. Remember those quack tonics and empty chapels? You adjust your cloak, its damp weight a reminder of everything you've carried. The path stretches on and you move faster, your stick ready, your eyes darting. Survival isn't just about outlasting the plague anymore, it's about outwitting the shadows that prey on what's left. You creep along the muddy path, your cloak, that tattered relic from a corpse, sodden and dragging like the weight of your losses. The bandit scare still has your heart thumping, but now a deeper ache surfaces, one that cuts sharper than hunger or fear. The Black Death didn't just steal lives, it tore apart the ties that held your world together. Your family, your kin, the neighbors who shared their fire, they're gone or scattered, and you're left to rebuild bonds in a world that feels like a graveyard. It's the early 1350s, and with maybe half of Europe's population dead, a mainstream estimate of 50 million or more, families are fractured, leaving survivors like you to navigate a lonely new reality. You pass a crumbling cottage, its door swinging in the wind, and the sight pulls you back to your own home. Your sister's laughter, your father's calloused hands, the way your mother hummed over her stew, they're ghosts now, haunting every step. You've lost count of the graves you've seen, some marked, most not. A mainstream fact anchors you. The plague's speed was merciless, often killing entire households in days, leaving survivors to bury their own or flee. You buried your sister yourself, the shovel shaking in your hands. The memory burns and you grip your stick, that flimsy comfort, hard enough to splinter it. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some survivors, desperate for connection, adopted stray children or even animals, calling them family to fill the void. You've seen a man in a nearby village treat a scrawny dog like a son, sharing his last crust. A dry laugh escapes, surviving the plague just to mother a mutt. That's your kind of desperation. But you get it. You've thought about knocking on a stranger's door, offering to share what little you have, just to hear a human voice. Instead, you keep walking, the path slick under your boots. The air smells of wet earth and absence, and you wonder if you'll ever feel at home again. You spot a woman by the roadside, mending a torn sack, her face lined with grief. You nod, but she looks away, clutching her bundle like it's all she has left. Trust is scarce now. Remember those bandits, those quack tonics? You've heard of survivors forming new families, banding together to share harvests, but you've also seen betrayal, neighbors stealing from neighbors. Historians still argue whether the plague's losses forged stronger communities or broke them apart for good. You feel the fracture in your chest where love used to live. You want to reach out, but fear keeps your feet moving. The path curves past a stream, its water gurgling like a faint memory of laughter. You pause, splashing your face, and see your reflection. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, a stranger. You think of your cousin who might still be alive in the town ahead. You've heard he survived, but the road between you feels like a chasm. Another grim chuckle, surviving the plague to walk alone. That's your punishment. You pass a child's shoe in the mud, small and abandoned, and your throat tightens. You've thought about searching for others, building a new family, but every stranger's face reminds you of those you lost. The town's walls loom closer, grey and scarred. You hope to find your cousin, or at least someone to share a fire with, but hope feels like a fraying thread. A third dark laugh slips out, surviving the plague to chase ghosts. That's your lonely quest. You adjust your cloak, its damp weight a reminder of the family you carry in memory. The path stretches on and you keep moving, your stick tapping the ground, a rhythm to drown out the silence of a world without kin. You shuffle forward, the mud clinging to your boots like the grief you can't shake. That patched cloak, still carrying the ghost of its former owner, slaps wetly against your legs as you move. The loneliness of a world without family weighs heavy, but now a fresh dread creeps in, cold as the mist curling around you. The Black Death isn't done with you yet. Whispers of its second wave ripple through the survivors' tales, a spectre that could strike again. It's the early 1350s, and the plague, which already culled maybe half of Europe's people, a mainstream toll of 50 million or more, has a nasty habit of returning, like a guest you never wanted back. You scan the horizon, half expecting to see death riding in on the fog. You pass a cluster of graves, their dirt fresh, unmarked except for a few wilting wildflowers. The sight makes your stomach lurch, not from hunger, though that turnip and stolen crust are long gone, but from the fear of the plague's encore. You've heard stories from travellers, entire towns wiped out twice, survivors who thought they'd won, only to wake with black sores. A mainstream fact chills you. The plague didn't vanish after its first rampage. It lingered, striking in waves through the 1350s and beyond, each one smaller but no less terrifying. You touch your neck, checking for lumps, a habit you can't break. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some survivors wore garlic necklaces, believing the stench would repel the pestilence, as if death could be scared off by bad breath. A dry laugh escapes, surviving the first plague just to choke on garlic fumes? That's your kind of absurd. You've seen people try stranger things, like sleeping with a live frog tied to their chest. You haven't gone that far, but every cough from a passerby makes you flinch. Your stick, that old flimsy comfort, gripped tight as if it could ward off disease. The path winds past a derelict barn, its roof half collapsed, straw spilling like a wound. You hear a low moan from inside and freeze, your heart hammering. It's just a wind gust, but for a moment you imagined a plague-stricken soul, abandoned and festering. Historians still argue whether these later waves were the same disease or a new strain, maybe spread by trade routes or filthy water. You don't care about the cause, you just want to avoid the symptoms. You've seen them: fever, chills, those grotesque buboes swelling under the skin. The memory of your sister's final days flashes, her face pale as ash, and you shove it down, focusing on the muddy path. You pass a lone traveller, his face wrapped in a rag, eyes darting like he's seen the plague's shadow too. He doesn't speak, and neither do you. Trust is a luxury. Remember those bandits? Another grim chuckle, surviving the first plague to live in constant fear of the next. That's your cursed luck. The air smells of damp wood and decay, and you pull your cloak tighter, as if it could shield you from more than the cold. You've heard of towns sealing their gates to keep the plague out, but you've also heard of it sneaking in anyway, carried by rats or desperation. The town's walls are closer now, their stones jagged against the grey sky. You hope for safety, maybe news of your cousin, but the fear of another outbreak gnaws at you. A third dark laugh slips out, surviving the plague only to dread its sequel. That's your endless vigil. You keep moving, your stick tapping the ground, your eyes scanning for signs of sickness in every shadow. The road feels like a tightrope, and you're not sure if you're walking towards salvation or another grave. You drag your feet through the clinging mud, your cloak, that worn scrap from a dead man's back, sodden and heavy as the fear that settled in your bones. The dread of the plague's second wave still haunts you, but now a new threat sparks in the air, sharp as the crackle of a fire. The Black Death has left survivors grasping for someone to blame, and fear has twisted into something uglier: witch hunts. It's the early 1350s, and with society fraying, half the population gone, maybe 50 million souls, a mainstream estimate, people are turning on each other, pointing fingers at neighbors, widows, anyone who seems off. You grip your stick, that flimsy lifeline, and keep your head low, knowing a wrong glance could mark you as cursed. You pass a charred stake by the roadside, its base littered with ashes and bone fragments. The sight makes your stomach twist, not just from hunger, those days of fighting crows for crusts linger, but from the stories you've heard. A woman in a nearby village was burned for cursing her neighbors with plague, her only crime being a knack for herbs. A mainstream fact grounds you: the plague's chaos fueled scapegoating, with accusations of witchcraft spiking, as people sought reasons for their suffering. You've seen the mobs, their eyes wild with fear, ready to burn anyone who doesn't fit. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some accusers claimed witches rode brooms to spread plague miasmas, a tale as wild as those garlic necklaces you scoffed at. A dry laugh escapes, surviving the plague, just to dodge a witch's pyre. That's your twisted fate. You've heard of midwives and healers, once trusted, now dragged to trial for mixing salves. You remember the old woman in your village who brewed nettle tea? She's gone now, maybe burned, maybe fled. You keep walking, the path slick under your boots, the air thick with damp and suspicion. You spot a group of villagers ahead, huddled around a cart, their voices low but sharp. A man points at a woman, her hair wild, her hands bound. She's shouting her innocence, but the crowd's faces are stone. You slip behind a gnarled tree, heart pounding. Historians still argue whether the plague's witch hunts were a new phenomenon or just old fears inflamed by loss. You don't care about debates, you just don't want to be next. You've kept to yourself, but your patched cloak and solitary ways could look suspicious to desperate eyes. You touch the cross at your neck, a faint hope against the madness. The crowd moves on, dragging the woman toward the town. You wait, breath shallow, until they're gone. The path feels heavier now, every rustle a potential accuser. You think of your sister, how she'd have calmed a mob with a smile, gone now like so much else. Another grim chuckle, surviving the plague to fear your own neighbors. That's your new prison. The air smells of smoke and wet earth, and you pull your cloak tighter, as if it could hide you from judging eyes. You've heard of towns where accusations are a death sentence, no trial needed. Trust is a ghost. Remember those bandits, those quack tonics? The town's walls loom ahead, grey and foreboding. You hope for safety, maybe a familiar face, but the fear of being marked a witch clings like damp wool. A third dark laugh slips out, surviving the plague to face a mob's torch. That's your cursed luck. You keep moving, your stick tapping the mud, your eyes darting for any sign of danger. The road is a gauntlet now, and survival means staying invisible in a world burning with blame. You shuffle forward, the mud sucking at your boots like it's trying to hold you back. Your cloak, that patched relic from a dead man, dripping with the weight of fear and suspicion. The witch hunts you, narrowly escaped, still linger in your mind, their smoky echoes tainting the air. Now, as you near the town, a new hardship presses in. Trade, that lifeblood of medieval life, has ground to a halt. It's the early 1350s, and the Black Death, having claimed perhaps 50 million souls, a mainstream toll, has left markets empty and roads silent, turning your world into a stagnant pool where goods and hope both drown. You clutch your stick, that weary comfort, and feel the emptiness of a life without commerce. You pass a roadside stall, its wooden frame sagging, its goods, once bright cloth or salted fish, reduced to a pile of mouldy rags. The merchant who tended it is gone, probably dead or fled, his voice no longer calling out prices. A mainstream fact steadies you: the plague decimated merchants, artisans and sailors, collapsing trade routes that once stretched from Flanders to Venice. You remember the peddler who brought silks and spices to your village, his tales of far-off lands now buried with him. The path ahead is littered with broken barrels and scattered straw, signs of a world that stopped moving goods and started hoarding fear. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some survivors believed the plague was carried by tainted cloth, leading them to burn bales of wool rather than trade them. A dry laugh escapes, surviving the plague just to set fire to your own livelihood. That's the madness you're living. You've seen villagers shun travelers, fearing they bring the pestilence on their backs. You pause by a ditch where a cart lies overturned, its wheels cracked, its load of grain spilled and rotting. The sight twists your empty stomach. Remember that turnip you scavenged, and you wonder if you'll ever taste bread again. The path winds toward the town, but the gates are shut, their wood scarred from hasty repairs. You hear shouts from within, not of trade, but of arguments over dwindling stores. Historians still argue whether the plague's trade collapse spurred local self-sufficiency or just deepened isolation. You feel the latter, the silence of empty markets louder than any bell. You've heard of towns where coins are useless, barter the only currency, a knife for a sack of oats, a cloak for a loaf. You pat your pockets, finding only lint, and sigh. Trust is a ghost here. Remember those bandits, those quack tonics, and every stranger is a potential thief. You pass a ruined inn, its sign swaying, its hearth cold. Once it buzzed with travelers swapping tales. Now its tables gather dust. You think of the brewer who served ale, his laugh cut short by the plague. Another grim chuckle. Surviving the plague to starve in a ghost town, that's your luck. The air smells of damp wood and decay, and you pull your cloak tighter, its dampness a reminder of lost prosperity. You've heard rumors of ports where ships rot at anchor, their crews dead, their cargoes spoiled. Trade was your lifeline. Now it's a memory, and you're left to fend in a world that's forgotten how to share. The town walls rise closer, their silence ominous. You hope for a scrap of food, maybe a familiar face, but the closed gates suggest a fortress, not a haven. A third dark laugh slips out. Surviving the plague to face an empty market, that's your endless struggle. You keep moving, your stick tapping the mud, your eyes scanning for any sign of life. The road feels like a dead end, and survival now means scavenging where trade once thrived. You trudge onward, the mud pulling at your boots with every step, your cloak, that patched shroud from a dead man's shoulders, sagging with the weight of a world in ruins. The silence of collapsed trade still echoes in your ears, but now a faint flicker of purpose stirs beneath the exhaustion. The Black Death has left devastation in its wake, yet you're driven to rebuild, to claw some semblance of life from the ashes. It's the early 1350s, and with perhaps 50 million gone, a mainstream estimate, society lies shattered, but survivors like you are starting to clear the rubble. You lean on your stick, that battered companion, and feel the slow pulse of renewal beneath the decay. You pass a field where a handful of villagers work, their scythes cutting through overgrown weeds to plant new seeds. The sight lifts your spirits, a rare warmth against the damp. A mainstream fact steadies you. After the plague, some communities replanted fields and rebuilt homes, laying the groundwork for recovery that would stretch into the next century. You remember the abandoned plough you saw weeks ago, its rust a symbol of despair. Now these hands are turning soil, a quiet defiance. You pause watching a woman sow barley, her movement steady despite her hollow cheeks. It's not much, but it's a start, and you feel a pang of hope, fragile as a new shoot. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some survivors built plague crosses from scavenged wood, believing they'd bless the land's renewal. A dry laugh escapes, surviving the plague just to pray over sticks? That's your kind of faith. You've seen similar markers, crude but earnest, dotting the countryside. You step closer, offering to help the woman, and she nods, handing you a sack of grain. Your hands tremble as you scatter seeds, the earth cool against your fingers, a small act, but it feels like reclaiming something lost. Historians still argue whether this rebuilding was a return to normalcy or the birth of a new order, but you're too tired to ponder, just glad to move forward. The path winds past a half-repaired cottage, its thatch patched with straw and hope. You hear a hammer's ring, a sound you haven't known in months. Inside, a man nails planks, his face grim but determined. You think of your own hovel, its roof caved in, maybe you could fix it too. Another grim chuckle, surviving the plague to play carpenter? That's your new trade. The air smells of fresh-cut wood and damp earth, a change from the rot you've breathed. You've heard of towns pooling labor to raise barns, sharing tools where trade once ruled. Remember those empty markets? And the idea stirs you to keep going. You pass a child dragging a stick through the mud, drawing shapes, a faint echo of play. It's a reminder of life persisting, and your chest loosens. You've thought of finding your cousin, rebuilding a family, those fractured bonds you mourned. A third dark laugh slips out, surviving the plague to mend a roof and a life? That's your quiet rebellion. The town ahead grows clearer, its walls showing signs of repair, smoke rising from chimneys. You hope for a bed, maybe a meal, but also for a chance to join this slow rebirth. You adjust your cloak, its weight a badge of survival, and keep moving, your stick tapping a rhythm of resilience. The road feels less like a grave now, more like a path to something new. You shuffle along the worn path, your boots sinking into the softening mud, your cloak, that patched survivor from a dead man's back, draping you like a weary shield. The faint stirrings of rebuilding you glimpsed in the fields and half-mended homes linger in your mind, a fragile thread of light in the gloom. The Black Death, having claimed perhaps 50 million souls across Europe, a mainstream toll, has left a world scarred, but not lifeless. It's the early 1350s, and though the plague's shadow still looms, you sense a whisper of recovery, a chance to breathe again. You lean on your stick, that faithful crutch, and let the rhythm of your steps carry you toward the town ahead. You pass a small garden where a man tends frail sprouts, his hands gentle despite the calluses. The sight warms you, a quiet victory over the weeds and despair that once ruled. A mainstream fact steadies you. By the mid-1350s, some regions began to stabilize, with survivors replanting and repopulating, setting the stage for a slow return to growth. You think of the barley you helped sow, the cool earth under your fingers, remember that moment, and feel a flicker of pride. The man nods at you, offering a radish, its skin rough but real. You bite into it, the taste sharp and alive, a contrast to the rot you've known. A quirky tidbit makes you smirk. Some survivors planted plague herbs like rosemary, believing they'd ward off future outbreaks, turning gardens into talismans. A dry laugh escapes, surviving the plague just to garden against ghosts. That's your kind of magic. You've seen similar plots, their rows neat against the chaos, and it stirs a hope you'd buried. The path curves past a stream, its water clearer now, reflecting a sky that's less grey. Historians still argue whether this recovery was a fragile bounce or a true turning point, but you feel it in the air. A softening, a chance. You splash your face, the cold, a gentle wake-up, and keep moving. The town's walls rise ahead, patched but standing, smoke curling from chimneys like promises. You hear voices, not shouts, but murmurs of trade or planning. You think of your cousin, that faint hope of family, those frayed ties you've mourned, and wonder if he's there, rebuilding too. Another grim chuckle, surviving the plague to chase a dream? That's your stubborn heart. The air smells of wood smoke and growing things, a change from the decay you've carried. You've heard of villages pooling resources, sharing labor. Remember those empty markets? And the thought lifts your steps. A child runs by, chasing a ball of rags, his laugh, a rare sound that eases your chest. You smile, a crack in your armor, and adjust your cloak, its weight a reminder of all you've borne. A third dark laugh slips out, surviving the plague to hear a child's joy. That's your fragile dawn. The town gates creak open as you approach, revealing faces less gaunt, hands busy with repair. You step inside, your stick tapping softly, your eyes seeking a familiar figure. Hope flickers, faint but real, as the darkness begins to fade and you let yourself imagine a life beyond survival. The night deepens around you, the soft hum of a distant breeze blending with the gentle rustle of leaves, as if the world itself is lulling you to rest. The journey through this shadowed time fades like a dream, the weight of plague and loss easing with each slow breath you take. You're safe now, cradled by the quiet promise of renewal, the radish's taste lingering as a small, sweet victory. The faces of those you've lost, your sister, your kin, soften into memories, no longer sharp with pain but warm with love. The town's lights dim in your mind's eye, a gentle glow guiding you to peace. Close your eyes now, let the darkness wrap you in its calm embrace and drift into a restful slumber, where the past whispers softly and the future waits in silence.